We interact with decorations in many different ways. The decorations in carpets, clothes we wear, show patterns connected in one way or the other. Hello everyone, this is our junior certificate mathematics lesson and the topic is sequences. I am your presenter Ragwan Khare. Before we develop this topic further, let us have a look at the lesson objectives. The lesson objectives say describe in words patterns and sequences, and then in the process we are going to complete a sequence. This is what is going to guide our discussion today. But before we can actually give examples with regard to this, let us have a look at what a pattern is as well as a sequence. A pattern is regarded as a regular way in which something happens or occurs. That is, there has to be a way on which something happens or occurs. And then a sequence is a set of numbers which shows a particular order. That is a sequence. Now, I am with a learner here with me, therefore, who is going to help me in today's discussion. Let me find out from him what we should discuss in today's lesson.
Good day, everyone. I want us to present diagrammatic patterns. Can you come with examples and present them in a diagram?
You are saying how do you represent patterns in a diagram? I've got an example here with me which will help us discuss such a situation. Let us have a look at it. The example says tomatoes on a farm are planted around an irrigation system according to the pattern shown. That is, we got a pattern shown here. This is the pattern that you are given, and then it says draw the next two plantations. So when you look into this pattern, we can see that there are some plantations around this rather a square kind of, and then now we are to present the next two patterns following the same sequence this has. Now, when you look into this pattern, around the first square we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 plantations around this square. Now when we look at the second part here, we've got 3 around that irrigation system, and then the third we've got 4. So we can see that as you move from the first to the second, then you go on, there is an addition of a plant on either side of this square. Now this simply means when you are to represent the next two plantations on this, the plantation at stage number 4 will have 5 plantations on each side of this square, and then the next one will have 5. How do we get that? We simply look into the pattern here. We can see that from the first we got 2. Now when we move to the second, we've got 3 on either side of this irrigation system. When we look into this, we've got 4. Now that means the next one will have 5 plantations around the irrigation system, and let us draw that. If we take this to be, let us take this to be our square now. Irrigation system is here. Remember the last one has got 4. So in here we are going to have 5 around this. So you'll draw these 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the fifth will be here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the fifth will be here. So we have managed to draw the 4th plantation. What about the last plantation? Because the question said present the next 2 plantations. So here we've got 5. The next now will have 6 plantations around this irrigation system, and you have to draw it. So how do you draw it? This is what we have. We've got 5 here. So in here we should have 6. Now we are going to draw those 6 plantations on either side of this square. Then this will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There has to be 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6. So this is a pattern. we can see that when you check from the first plantation, this is 2, 3, 4, then 5, then 6. So this is a pattern. We can also look at another situation where a pattern is represented in a diagram format. Let us have a look at it. Another example says a carpenter is making a pattern from black and red tiles in order to tile a sitting room floor. He makes the pattern in steps as shown in the diagram below. Draw the next diagram. So it means we got diagrams drawn. In this case, our diagrams are here. This is the first step. And then consider the pattern. This is the second. And then now the question says draw the next step. So how will our next step be? We've got our tiles are here. So how are we going to draw our next step? Let us start it. Right. This is red, should be here. We must make sure that we follow the pattern given. So the black part is supposed to be here. Right. Then we got red, then we should have black. And then after black, we should take red. Right. And then after black, after red, take black. And then we check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, the next one, we're going to take a red tile, place it here, and then the last will be black. This is our last stage. Make sure that every time you need to check how the tiles appear. Here we can see that on either side is black, 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 black. So every time we should end with a black and then a black on the other side. So this is the third step. So here we have managed to create the next step after the second one. Now let us go for a short break. When we come back, we'll continue with our sequences and patterns. Welcome back from the short break. We're still discussing sequences and patterns. And I'm still with the learner here, therefore, who is helping me in today's discussion. I want to give him this opportunity to ask another question so that we develop this topic further.
Thank you, sir. I want us to discuss sequences. Give example describing in words how a sequence is formed and writing the next two numbers of the sequence.
Thank you. You're saying how do we describe sequences in words? And in addition, I should go on and write the next two terms within a sequence. Remember, we said a sequence is a set of numbers which follow a certain pattern. So when we talk about sequence, it means we are going to be focusing on numbers. I've got examples here with me, says describing words, and I've got a set of numbers here. So if there are a set of numbers like this, it means this is a sequence now. Now, if it's a sequence, this sequence should follow a certain pattern. And you're saying we should describe in words and then write the next two terms within this sequence. We've got 3, 6, 9, 12. These are terms within this sequence. And then the question is, how is this sequence formed? In words, this sequence is formed by starting with 3, add 3. Starting with 3. Add 3. This is how we describe the sequence in weights, starting with 3 at 3. It is very important that you state that you are starting with 3, because if you don't state where you are starting, then no one will know exactly where you are starting. Somebody may start at 12, but then if you're going to start at 12, it doesn't describe the sequence fully. So it has to state where you are starting. And then when we examine this, we can see that every time for you to get the next term, you need to add 3 to the previous term so that you get the next term. Like here, this is 3. To get 6, you add 3 to this 3 here, you get 6. And then the next term, which is 9, it's a 3 plus this 6, getting 9. And then we got 12 here. So to get this 12, what we did is to add 9, rather 3 to this 9 to get 12. So the sequence in weights simply says starting with 3, add 3. And then you're saying what will be the next 2 terms within this sequence. If we have 3, 6, 9, 12, then the next 2 terms will be 12 plus 3, it's 15. And then 15 plus 3 is 18. So the next 2 terms within this sequence will be 15 and 18. How do we get them? According to this, you add 3 to the previous term to get the next. So these are the next 2 terms within this sequence. And remember, every time when you're asked to describe in weights, you need to state where your sequence is starting. Here we're saying starting with 3, add 3. Let us have a look at another example to elaborate on this. We've got another example here. Minus 8, minus 3, 2, 7. Then the question is, state in weights how this sequence is formed. Now, this one we can see that is starting at minus 8. So, starting with negative 8, then what should happen after starting with negative 8? What are you going to do to this negative 8 to get the next term? In this case, it's minus 3. What should we do to minus 8 to get minus 3? Now, we can see that here, minus 8 plus 5 gives minus 3. So, starting with minus 8, add 5. This is how this sequence is formed. Starting with negative 8, add 5. And we can see minus 8 plus 5 is minus 3. So the sequence has been described in weights. And then what will be the next 2 terms within this sequence? Minus 8, minus 3, 2, 7. And then what are the next 2 terms within this sequence? This is just a typical ideal exam question. And you must be in position to say, when given this sequence, you can write the next 2 terms or so. Now, we've got 7. And we're saying, starting with minus 8, add 5. Minus 8 plus 5 is minus 3. Then minus 3 plus 5 is 2. 2 plus 5 is 7. So the pattern continues. You can see that every time you are adding 5 to the previous term so that you get the next. Now, you will add 5 to this 7. 5 plus 7 is 12. And then 12 plus 5 is 17. So the next 2 terms within this sequence are 12 and 17. This is how you describe in weights how this sequence is formed, and then the next 2 terms within this sequence.
Thank you, sir, for what you have discussed. But before you end this lesson, what about a sequence of fraction or decimals?
Let us have a look at another example. This one, sequence of decimals. 0.7, 0.5, 0.1, 0.7, 0.5, 0.3, and then 0.1. So, still the same, you are to describe in weights how this sequence is formed. You examine it. Got 0.7, 0.5, 0.3. So here, what we can see is the sequence is decreasing. Now, because the sequence is decreasing as you go towards the right-hand side, it means then you are subtracting a certain number. Now, here, when we describe in weights, it will be starting with 0.7, add. Are you adding? This time around you are not adding, because you can see that it's minus 7 and the numbers are decreasing as you go this direction, the numbers are decreasing. So it means you are subtracting. Then this will be starting with 0.7. How do we get 0.5? We just have to subtract 0.2. So starting with 0.7, subtract 0.2. This is how this sequence is formed. And then the next two numbers within this sequence will be 0.7, 0.5, 0.3, 0.1. And then what are the next two terms within this sequence? We are subtracting 0.2. So we add 0.1. What is 0.1 minus 0.2? It's 0.1 minus 0.2. This is negative 0.1. So we're going to have negative 0.1. And then negative 0.1 minus 0.2. It's negative and negative. Negative 0.1 minus 0.2. So it's negative, negative. This will be negative 0.3. This is how this sequence, these are the next two terms within this sequence. It's negative 0.1, negative 0.3. Then the list goes on. Let us have a look at the last example within this part. Say sequence of fractions. So it means we can also have a situation where sequences are given in fraction format, like we're having here. You got a sequence half, 3/4, 1, 1 1/4. So it says, how is this sequence formed? You need to examine how these terms come about. Now we can see this is half, 3 1/4. Now what happened here is 1/4 has been added to the previous to get the next. So how do we describe this in weights? It will be starting with half, add, it should be add, you add 1/4. So this is how this sequence is formed. Starting with a half, you add 1/4. Now you can go on and write the next two terms within this. All you need to do is to add 1/4 to this. But remember, for this 1 1/4, you need to change this into an improper fraction first. Then after changing to an improper fraction, you add 1/4. Then you get the next term. Then you get the last term after adding to what you got. This is how you rather describe sequences in weights. You need to state where you are starting, and then also you need to know the term that you are to add or to subtract. Let us go for a short break. When we come back, we'll continue with this lesson. Welcome back from the short break. We're still discussing sequences. Let us have a look at this example which I have on the board, and I believe it will help you understand sequences even further. The sequence is 10, 8, 6, 4. When we look into this, we can see that the sequence is decreasing as you go towards your right hand side. It's 10, 8, 6, 4. Then the question is, how do you describe in words this sequence? Remember, I stated that you need to always state where you are starting. So it's 10. This will be starting with 10. Add. In this case, are we adding or subtracting? It's very important to always check whether you are adding or subtracting. So it's 10, 8, 6, 4. So the numbers are decreasing as you go towards the right hand side. This simply means you are subtracting. For you to get the next term, you subtract a number from the previous one. In this case, we got 8. This simply means we have subtracted 2 from 10 to get 8. So starting with 10, you subtract, starting with 10, you subtract 2. Starting with 10, subtract 2. So we can see when we subtract 2 from 10, it will be 8. 8 minus 2, 6. 6 minus 2 is 4. Then the sequence continues. Then what will be the next two terms within this sequence? It will be 10, 8, 6, 4. Then what are the next two terms within this? 4 minus 2 is 2. And then 2 minus 2 is 0. Then the list goes on. This is how we find the next two terms within this sequence. Remember, we're saying when we describe in weights, you need to state where you are starting. So here we said starting with 10, subtract 2, and we have achieved, or rather we have found the next two terms. Let us move on with our lesson. Remember, under sequences, you can also have a situation where sequences are presented in a percentage form. And how do we present sequences in a percentage form? We can have 20%, 40%, it's not just 40, but 40%, and then 60%, then 80%. What we have done here, we have formulated a sequence in percentage form. Now, how do you describe in weights how this sequence is formed? It's a sequence of percentages. Now, we've got 20, 40, 60, 80. When you have a close look at this, you can see that every time you are adding 20% to get the next term within this sequence. So this simply means when you are to describe this in weights, you will say starting with 20%, add, not end, but add. You add 20%. As you can see, what happened here is you have added 20 to this to get 40%. So starting with 20%, add 20%. And then the next two terms within this sequence will be 20%, let's say 2, 40%, 60%, 80%, and then 20%, rather 80% plus 20%. Remember, we are saying every time you add 20% to the previous term. So it's 80% plus 20%. This gives 100%. And then what will be the last term? It's 100 plus 20, giving 120%. This is how we form a sequence in percentages. We can always come out with another example where you are formulating a sequence in percentage. You can always come out with an example where you are formulating a percentage, rather a sequence in percentage. For instance, you can have 15%, 20%, 25%, then 30%. Then how is this sequence being formed? It's a sequence in percentage. Now, all we can see is here, every time for you to get the next term, you add 5% to the previous. This is 25%. It's 25%, right? For you to get the next term within this sequence, you add 5% to the previous. So in ways, this will be starting with 15%, add 5%. It is important that you always state where you are starting. So starting with 15%, add 5%. And then the next two terms within this sequence of percentage will be, we've got 15%, 20%, 25%, 30%, and then 30% plus 5% is 35%. 35%, and then 35% plus 5% is 40%. This is how sequences are formed. Now, Therefore, you need to understand that when we talk about sequences, it does not mean that they have to be whole numbers only. You can have a situation where you are asked to formulate a percentage in fraction form. Rather, you are to formulate a sequence in fraction form, or you are to formulate a sequence in percentage form, decimal form, and all you need to do is just to look at the pattern. Then, if you are to add or subtract, you just follow that. It's as simple as that. We have now come to the end of today's lesson, and I believe what we have discussed has benefited you, and you'll keep revising sequences. Till we meet again in our next lesson, thank you.